The arts shape the imagination of the church and provide the catalyst through which many people encounter God. The theological constructs that affirm and support the visual arts as an active part of worship help us understand the relationship between art, faith, and worship. Theologians today encounter much less resistance to the arts than during the Reformation, and yet apathy and indifference still exist towards the arts in many churches. And while the current trend of just ignoring the visual arts is certainly a far cry from the iconoclasm of the 16th century, the consequences are the same. Whether we are destroying and removing art and images from our sanctuaries or simply not investing in the creation of art, the same fate awaits. Worship and sacred spaces that are devoid of art that can spiritually transform us and transport us into an awareness of the presence of God. I believe that God is interested in creativity, beauty, and the arts, as evidenced by creation, and human creativity is derived from being made in the image of God, and it is continually reborn and transformed through faith in the incarnation of Jesus Christ. And this concept of imago Dei, being made in the image of God, is just one theological framework that supports human creativity. And the Incarnation offers us a theological explanation and structure for how the visual arts hold redemptive qualities for Christian worship. Life on earth began with art, and when we create, we are connecting with and imitating God, the original creator and artist. And creativity is part of humanity's inheritance. It is one of the ways we are made in the image of God. And our desire to create and then delight in what we have made is a reflection of God's original act of creation. And the principles of creation and imago Dei assert that humans, both women and men, were created in the image of God. And God has implanted something of God's divine nature into humanity. A wise 14-year-old friend of mine, Mary Kate, said that we usually inherit things from our parents, and our creativity is part of our inheritance from God. One of the characteristics common to both God and humanity is our desire and ability to make things. God has given us the gift, drive, and ability to create. And when we engage in creative activities, whether that's painting a picture, designing a website, planting a garden, crafting a lesson plan, taking a picture, cooking a meal, or just putting an outfit together, we are accepting the gift of creativity which was given to us by our Creator. And in this way, we were created to create. And our desire to create, our ability to make concepts tangible, and our pleasure in making things are all reflections of God's original creation that He declared very good. And this means that creativity is not only allowed, it is essential. To express ourselves in art is to experience more fully the richness of being human. Animals can make primitive tools and be taught to recognize sounds and instinctively make complex habitats like a web or a honeycomb. But only humans make art. The remarkable ability to create art is part of humanity's identity as God's image bearers, and it is a universal quality to all humankind. Everything that it means to be made in the image of God applies to everyone, despite any differences in birthplace, gender, race, ethnicity, orientation, or religious belief or unbelief. Every human being who has ever or will ever be born on this earth is created in the image of God. We are the children of a creative God, and everyone is creative in some way. And as the human family, we are all gifted and commissioned with continued creativity in the world alongside God. We are God's co-creators. In Genesis, God creates the human, the Adam, to continue the imaginative process of creation as God's co-creator. And instead of leaving the human out of the innovation loop at creation, God calls on the human to name and tame the animals, which is an act of creativity itself. It is also a charge to rule over and to have authority. In Genesis chapter 1, beginning in verse 26, it says, "Let us make humankind in our image, in our likeness, so that they may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground." You see, God commissioned humans to rule over and exercise dominion over every other living thing on the earth. And scholars suggest that this rule and dominion is royal language and should be considered a ruling with compassion and wisdom. Humanity's role is to be stewards over creation on God's behalf. And so if human creativity originated by being created in the image of God, and humanity's role is to steward and rule on behalf of God, then the work of humans, creativity and art included, are done with divine approval and authority. The creation moment in Genesis also demonstrates God's blessing and affirmation on the created world. God declares created physical matter very good. And yet, despite this outright acceptance of the material world by God, many in churches today continue to either ignore or be suspicious of the visual arts because of their material nature. And their suspicion and distrust of the visual arts could imply a suspicion and distrust of God's creation. On the one side are Christians who see all religious images as potential idols, and on the other side are those who cannot imagine worship without the visual dimension, and who argue that the denial of images is tantamount to the denial of the goodness of creation. When we create art that reflects beauty and goodness and truth, and then dedicate that art to the Lord, it is a form of praise and worship to the one who breathed in us the longing to create. And my friend Jill Maxwell put it this way. She said, "The first breath of God was the creative spirit, and we all breathe in the longing to create because it is our spiritual connection with God." And the act of co-creation with God is worship. And it is one of the many ways humans are made in the image of God. And in this way, the image of God is a verb. It's not static or finite. It is a living, breathing activity that incorporates both the physical and the emotional to express the whole human experience through art. When we take up the pen, the baton, or the brush to create, or when we sit down to the potter's wheel, we are dynamically mirroring the image of God, the original artist, and we reflect the heart and mind of our Maker. And when we produce art, it is an expression of love and beauty, love for God and the beauty of God's creation. So creating visual art for and during worship can help us experience a spiritual discourse with God and engage in active communication as we are formed into the image and likeness of Christ.